But right now we're going to go into our story about Chris Hedges and Roger Waters. So this was an interesting interview. This is on the Real News Network. For those who are not aware, Chris Hedges has a show on the Real News Network called the Chris Hedges Report. He does great interviews on there. Sometimes it's historical interviews. Sometimes it's more about prison reform. He talks about that a lot on there. Also labor. And sometimes he interviews people like Roger Waters. So this particular piece here, I want to focus on is more so where they start to talk about U.S. Intervention and war. But he did talk to him about other things such as Pink Floyd as well. But let's go ahead and get into that.
But the Constitution is fierce against the forces of oppression. I mean, it had a kind of Orwellian quality to it. And when you take those kinds of stances, you make enemies.
Yeah, yes, I do. And I often wonder, how thick the dossier is in the FBI and the CIA, because I bet it's quite thick. And I know from experience that occasionally, I'm talking about the USA now, particularly because I live in the USA, and so I have to have I'm sort of constantly reapplying for an O1 visa, which is my permit to work, my permit to stay, to be resident in the United States. And the last time I went to get it renewed was in the American Embassy in London a few years ago. And I had somebody else who was with me. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but frankly, I couldn't give a damn, And he's a guy who works for me, and he's worked for me for many years. So I have an O1 visa, which is visas they give to people who are unique in some way. Nobody can do what I do because I'm me, and only I have my body of work. And it applies to actors and musicians and all kinds of people. And then people who work for people like me get O2 visas, which are attached, if you like, to that. Well, we went in together. Chubba, my friend Chubba, who's worked for me for 20 years. And I was 591 and he was 592 on the list, right? So suddenly he got called in, 592, and they gave him his O2 visa, and he was done. And I sat there for another 2.5 hours, even though I was the number before him. So I thought, oh my goodness, they're in a room having a meeting, trying to decide whether to let me back into the United States or not.
Let's pause there and let's discuss for a second. So Roger Waters, obviously, he said he lives in the United States, but, he has to have a certain type of visa to work here in the United States and then also to travel back and forth, like abroad, right? So here you have someone from Pink Floyd. They are trying to decide whether or not they even want to give him a visa. Very well known. I mean, I think everyone knows who Roger Waters is, whether you listen to Pink Floyd or not. And they're trying to decide if they want to even let him come back into the country. Now, why is that? Because Roger Waters has been very vocal about war. He's been very vocal about especially this crisis with Russia and Ukraine. We saw that interview with CNN that he had recently. So he's not one to hold back. And not only has he's been vocal about this during interviews, he's also been vocal about this during his concerts. So he's one of those artists that actually expresses his political views during his shows. So I told you guys a while back, he was on a list. So they're trying to decide. They don't even know if they want to let him come back. Interesting.
And they did, and I'm happy that they did. But who knows next time? It's very difficult to know which way they're going to jump. And they must do the sums about, is this to our advantage or not?
Wait, what? JB, sadly, I didn't know who he was until a couple of months ago. I never listened to Pink Floyd. JB, what are we going to do with you? What am I going to do? I'm going to have to give you a music lesson. JB. Oh, dear. Oh, gosh.
And you have to believe that the neocons, the powers that be, who run the United States and completely control all the politicians and the government and We know that's just a charade. There's really no difference between any of the politicians. Because as we know, government can be purchased in the United States. That's what Citizens United is.
So he just told you that there's no difference in the politicians. Now, he's able to recognize this, and he didn't grow up here. But you have people who grew up in this country that still don't get that. And when you try to tell some of them that, they get upset. Oh, you're just going to let the other side win. Dude, regardless if it's a Republican or a Democrat, do you realize the government is always winning? You get that? The corporations are always winning. We're the ones that lose, regardless who it is. If you're working class, you're losing. If you're poor, you're losing under this two-party system. He gets that, and he didn't even grow up here under American politics. So how is it that we can get someone like him to truly just get it and understand? Maybe because he's coming from UK. But the people who live here under the system don't get it. They don't understand it. But he's letting you know, even when it comes to the politicians per se, they're mainly just puppets. Big money runs all of it. That's why he mentioned Citizens United, which Citizens United has not always been around. So if we could just get more people to wake up to this fact, we don't really control any of it. The politicians that are in DC are puppets or pawns, and big money controls all of it. All of it. This is why I tell you it doesn't matter who is running in that system, that two-party system. You can change the face. You can change the image. They're still all bought and paid for. That's the problem.
Which is only about 10 years old as far as I remember. But you can purchase the election, which is weird that they would call themselves a democracy, and yet government is for sale to the highest bidder. So
that's right. The person that has the most money gets what they want. We don't have as much of a choice as we would like to think. They want us to feel like we have a choice. Because if most Americans knew what was really going on and how these decisions are made, people would be livid. A lot of people would probably rise up over that.
What am I trying to say? I don't know. I've sort of run off the rails.
Well, but it's important. So I spoke in Florence. It was at the time a communist government. They invited me to speak to all graduating high school students. There were 10,000 of them in an auditorium. When I came back to Newark, the same experience. I'm a U.S. citizen with a valid U.S. passport. They put me in a room for 2 hours, told me nothing. And then a supervisor came in to somebody behind the computer screen and said, he's on a watch, tell him he can go. And I think that what they did to me is exactly what they did to you. It was intentional, just to let you know that they are watching you.
That's right. So see, they even are looking at Chris Hedges. It's a little bit of a fear tactic. My friend actually went through this. She's not a journalist, but she's a target because she was born in the Dominican Republic and then brought to the United States, and because of who her father was. So every time she travels abroad, she's usually taken aside, brought into that little room and questioned every time. And she loves to travel, so it's really annoying for her. So they're watching you. They're letting you know we're looking at you.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. I know that. I've been warned by people. I've been warned by people with connections. Oh, well, it's just that. Wouldn't you rather be Martin Luther King than Malcolm X? If you get too extreme, and I had this conversation, I thought this was in my own home, and I'm not going to mention the name of the guy who came and made this speech to me, but he's an ex-CIA desk. He ran the Middle Eastern desk for the CIA for a number of years. And there he was explaining to me that it's probably much better to be moderate, that you have more impact and effect if you don't get too Malcolm X-y. You know, I thought to myself, well, they killed Malcolm X and Martin Luther King.
That's right.
And then at the end of it, the guy said to me, and it was quite chilling, he said, well, you know, I just wouldn't want to see anything happen to you. And I thought, fuck me, I'm being threatened in my own home.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this for a second. When people make that comparison between MLK and Malcolm X, I want to remind people just what Roger just told you. When it comes to Martin Luther King, yes, he wasn't as radical as Malcolm X, but they still killed him. Martin Luther King said to take a nonviolent approach, even though there was violence inflicted on him and all the other activists during that time. Even though he was beaten, even though he was thrown in jail, even though he was hosed down with water, those powerful water hoses, by the way, those really hurt. Even though he had dogs like sicked on him, his approach was still, we must be nonviolent. We cannot have the violence. So even he was killed. So the way that what Roger Waters is actually saying here is like, well, if you're going to go out, you want to go out as a radical, or do you want to go out as someone who was a little bit more on the moderate side? That's what he's saying. It doesn't matter like the method that you choose to use. Using your voice sometimes is just enough for them to come after you.
By an ex-CIA desk manager. Amazing. And I tried not to bat an eye, and I sort of didn't, but I think, well, thank you for your time. And okay. I do bear it in mind sometimes. However, I don't wander around looking over my shoulder.
Well, you didn't pull any punches. I got to hand it to you. You did warn everyone at the beginning that if they don't like, if you're one of those who likes Roger Waters' music, but you don't like his politics, you can F off to the bar. I guess the bar being a place where maybe we can convert them. And I thought at the end of the concert, well, everybody was forewarned, completely forewarned. I'm going to wade into an area that is totally out of my expertise. But when you go back, and I want you to talk a little bit about it, I found it very poignant when you were talking about just your first kind of dreams of creating this iconic group, Pink Floyd. And the very tragic life that finally took your co-founder, Sid. But wouldn't that kind of political radicalism, wasn't that more infused within rock and roll when you began in the 60s? Or am I wrong about that?
I don't know if you're right or wrong, because it's not an area of interest, really.
Oh.
Because the radicalism comes from my mother and my father, so it's very. In fact, you and I may have even conversed about this briefly.
Yeah.
Because I know that a lot of your not instincts, but a lot of your beliefs and things are attached to the memory of your father and the fact that he stood up so bravely for what he believed in when he was a minister and ran up against the church and blah, and all of that. So I was chairman of the Young Socialists and the youth campaign for nuclear disarmament in Cambridge when I was 15-year-old, you know. So, and that came absolutely from the fact that my mother was a card-carrying communist up until 1956, which was the year when almost everyone in England stopped being a card-carrying communist because the British Communist Party refused to condemn the invasion of Hungary specifically.
I do remember, in reference to rock and roll per se, I do feel like if you listen to, rock music from, I'd say the 60s, especially the 70s, I do feel like it seemed like it was more accepted to be more political. Like there were musicians that spoke out against the Vietnam War in their music. There was a song, I forget who sings the song, but there was a song called War, What Is It Good For? The song that goes, War, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Remember that song? So I felt like that was more common practice back then. Nowadays, you don't hear that as much. There's a lot of focus on pop music and Sometimes lyrics that have no real meaning in life. It's just about materialism and buying a lot of things and having a lot of desires. But I feel like the political message back then, I feel like it was a little bit more common than what you see now, right? The last time was someone I do remember in particular. Eminem did speak out against the war in Iraq. I remember that. Oh, no, that was Afghanistan. I think it was Afghanistan. Anyway, he spoke out against one of them. His album, The Eminem Show, he talked about that a lot. He kind of slid it into his songs here and there, or he criticized that. In fact, I think it was more common for rappers to do that during that time, to criticize that. But at the same time, we also had a Republican president, you know? Where's that same critique and focus against war today now that we have a Democrat president? So that's something that I have learned to pay attention to. It's a lot easier to speak out and to appear more radical when you have someone like Trump in office. But do you still have that same type of radical mindset and that voice when you have a Democrat in office who's also a warmonger or committing war? I wouldn't say Trump is a warmonger per se, but when you also have a Democrat in office that is pro-war, and that's like dropping drones on people as well. Are you still that radical person, or is it only when it's a conservative that's in office?
By the Russians. And so that was a huge change that happened with the Communist Party. But my childhood is kind of littered with daily worker bazaars and you know, political meetings in the front room. My attachment to rock and roll was far less worthy. I couldn't see how I could get enough money to buy a sports car and start pulling chicks, to use that parlance, unless I won the football pools or something like that, you know, because I couldn't see how I could really make my way in the world in a way that I want. And rock and roll was sort of the only thing, and it was like winning the lottery or the football pools, because it's so unlikely that you would ever make a shilling out of a garage band. They weren't called garage bands there, but by putting a pop group together. But by some weird quirk of fate, it happened to me, partly because of Sid's great talent earlier on, because he was a writer of some note. I can, you know, still remember some of his lyrical work from those days. And not just his lyrics as well. He was something of a visionary in terms of his musical applications as well, though he learned a lot from Love and one or two of the other West Coast American groups. There was precious little going on in England at the time. The music industry, by and large, was run by a lovely man who was called Pons.
Let me move ahead just a little bit here. There we go.
Oh, assault. I mean, Victor Hara was murdered. Mercedes Sosa was exiled. Woody Guthrie was all but internally exiled. And this is what so impressed me about, you just didn't pull any punches at all. I mean, that's what made it, I think, so powerful. And I just want to say that it also was, it had artistic integrity. It wasn't a polemic. It could have been a polemic, in which case it would have fallen flat.
Yeah. Well, it's a disguised polemic.
Well, that's what all great art is.
Well, okay. I believe you to be right. You're exactly right. You can't. I could name English artists who are very, very earnest and, you know, and convinced and really laudable because of what they do. I can't not mention Billy Bragg, who's a name from from the English past of the thing.
Oh, sorry. I was making sure I'm getting to the right part.
It's like a bully in the schoolyard. You say, you do as we say, or we're going to kick your teeth in. That's American foreign policy. What?
Yeah, that's the part. Hold on.
Pinter talking about American foreign policy.
Yeah, this is in his Nobel Prize speech.
Exactly. It's
brilliant. Brilliant.
What does he say? Yeah, he says American foreign policy is like it's like a bully in the schoolyard. You say, you do as we say, or we're going to kick your teeth in. That's American foreign policy.
Yep.
What? How crude and debilitating and disgusting and old-fashioned. What are you living in the 9th century? What is wrong with you? What's wrong with them, of course, is that they picked up from Irving Kristol and, you know, and those early neocons and something of the new American century, that they could be the unipolar power and that they can rule the world.
Well, you know, we're all in trouble when Henry Kissinger is the voice of reason, which he is, and you know, you got in a lot of trouble on CNN. I don't know if I watched the whole thing, but you were not saying anything different than Kissinger had said, which is that they should give land for peace, the war has to end. And because whatever you think about Kissinger, and of course I think he's a war criminal, along with all those presidents you listed at your concert, he certainly understands geopolitics, and he understands the danger, and as I think you just laid out, of the Ukraine policy.
That's right.
So that's what we do all day. You do it as well. This is what we do. We the people who represent the we the people, who somewhere understand that we have to figure out a method of collaborating with one another that might, at the end of the day, save this beautiful planet that we all call home. Because they, the powers that be, the neocons, the profit mongers, the war machine, are working as hard as they can to destroy it as fast as they can, including possibly with nuclear war.
That's right. See, this is something to keep in mind here, is that, you know, the top like 1% and the military industrial complex, and that includes the weapon contractors as well, they have no problem working together. They have no problem working with people on the other side. Doesn't matter. You think they're sitting back thinking, are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? No, they see money, they see wealth, they see power. So they can have common interests and work together with those common interests, and all the political jargon can just be pushed aside. They can strip their label and just work together to keep the people suppressed, to keep people at the bottom. Now, I say that because why? Because if they can do that, then why can't working class people and poor people remove their political labels and work together and fight back against the 1%? This is something I'll tell you. At the end of the day, rich people, really, really rich people, when it comes down to money and power, they have no problem working with people who may be a Republican or a Democrat. Look at all the people that were connected to Jeffrey Epstein. You think they all had the same political ideology? No, but they were all rich. People look out for their class. Well, wealthy people look out for their class. Working class people and poor people need to get on board with that.